Good morning. Welcome to the Chatham Community Library. Thank you for your attendance on this bright sunny day. I am Mary Nettles, President of the Community Remembers Coalition Chatham. Our speaker today, Chatham County Commissioner Karen Howard, need no introduction. She will share with us how history is sometimes hidden in plain sight. Commissioner Howard will present the story we tell and the truth we hide. Now, please sit back and enjoy the history. Commissioner Howard, you have our full attention.
Good morning, all, and it's so exciting to see a crowd this size at a library on a Saturday morning. And I will start by saying that not every time the truth is not completely lifted out is it intentionally hidden or maliciously hidden. I think we often hear stories and forget that there are multiple perspectives and experiences of the same story. So I hope to bring some of that to you today. So this is a talk about the Mason House. And I'll start with once upon a time, because that's how all good stories should start, even true ones. And deep in the woods on the shores of what is now Jordan Lake, there was a beautiful old home. It stood there for many years in disrepair. Well, that's how the story goes. And indeed, that really is how the story goes. Ask anyone. If you venture up to North Chatham and take a right onto Transis Camp Road, and if you're brave enough to follow that long, winding, dusty path through a series of locked gates, past warning signs that tell of hunters and bald eagle nests and that you are not supposed to be there. And if you keep driving anyway, even when every sense is screaming, stop, turn around, go back, this road will not take you anywhere you want to go. But if you persist, then you will come to the John A. Mason House, a two-story Greek Revival farmhouse that dates back to about 1850. I think I skipped a slide. The home is one of the most prominent and successful, it's the home of one of the most prominent and successful plantation owners of the time. A man so generous and committed to the needs of his community that he gave the land that is now the North Carolina Botanical Gardens, Finley Golf Course, part of the Mason Farm Road that UNC Hospital sits on, and part of the land that houses the beautiful stone walls all throughout Chapel Hill that we admire and love so dearly. And he still had enough land to raise pigs, grow corn and wheat and other crops sufficient to feed the hungry students that came to UNC to seek a world-class education. I'm going to take you down that road. It's about a 15-minute drive, so this is sped up a little because I don't want you to be forced to listen for 15 minutes. But it goes on and on. Here is the story that you will find about the John Mason House. The John A. Mason House is a two-story Greek Revival dwelling, 2 stories high over a low brick foundation. The main block is 3 bays wide and 2 deep, with single shoulder exterior and chimneys of brick laid in common bond. Across the rear is an original 1-story shed extension. A 2-story L to the rear and another 1-story rear section are recent additions, neatly matching the original in finish. The exterior of the typical Greek Revival is distinguished by several interesting details. Defining each corner of the house and its various projections are flat-paneled corner posts treated as pilasters with well-molded caps. These carry a wide, plain frieze beneath the heavy overhang of the roof, which is emphasized by a molded boxed cornice. This cornice outlines the pedimented gable ends of all the 2-story sections of the house. The first level of the main facade is sheltered by a hip roof porch that is evidently original. The 5 bays are separated by simple, slender posts, square in section, with caps like those of the current pilasters. From these spring delicate brackets that continue as a molding along the porch cornice, creating shallow arches between the bays. And it keeps going. The stair is the most distinctive interior feature. The heavy newel is quite striking, composed visually of 2 large, faceted, teardrop-like elements set vertically end to end. Round sides together with an upper block adjoining the handrail, topped by a flat, rounded cap. We're not there yet. A heavy, rounded handrail is carried on slender balusters and ramps acutely at the second level railing, where it terminates in a post of similar design, having a single faceted teardrop set on a rectangular base. The open string is adorned with continuous brackets, creating an uninterrupted wave pattern. The John A. Mason House was probably built around 1850. It is a typical and well-preserved Greek Revival farmhouse, distinguished from more ordinary vernacular examples by consistent and interesting detail. And this is what I found, and it's all true. It's all true. But 2 days after moving into the house in 2022, I started to hear the other story of the Mason House. And it was a place where grand parties were held, families celebrated Christmases and Thanksgiving, hogs were slaughtered, babies were born, grandmas rocked babies in their arms on a front porch, grandpas taught their grandsons to hunt and to fish. And it is a beautiful building. The baluster really is extraordinary. And it really does have a lot of stories to tell, as I think any old house must. But just before you reach the house, there is a cemetery. In the center of the marked cemetery are the White family's graves, the plantation owners' family's graves. And at the very center is the gravestone of Sally Mason, who was buried in 1873, which I think bears note. Sally is buried between her 2 masters. Outside of the perimeter of that fence portion, there are stones delineating where slave graves would have been. And that was the first thing I saw before I came to the Mason House. And it told me 2 things. And there are 2 stories. One was that Sally Mason was deeply loved by the great-grandchildren of the plantation owner that buried her. And it also told me that even in death, Sally didn't get to be with her children. She still belonged to the family. And both stories are true. About a week after moving into the house, I had the privilege and pleasure of welcoming Sally Mason's great-great-grandson. He is the lead singer of Liquid Pleasure, Kenny Mann. He came to the house. Actually, he's come a couple of times since then. And he walked around and he touched things. And with tears in his eyes, he said to me, "This is the first time I have been in a place and touched things that I know my ancestors touched." And that conversation with him completely transformed my experience of living in that house and my responsibility to tell 2 stories. Because there really are 2 versions of the Mason House. And these historical documents that I procured, they are accurate. They do tell a lot about the house, its construction, the Mason descendants, how they inherited the home, but they don't mention that through the laws of Escheat, the existing Masons and Manns, who are Black, should have inherited the property. So I've welcomed the children of the Masons back to the house, both the white descendants and the black. We've had conversations about what that house could mean and how we can tell a better story. And we envision that someday it will be a space that Chatham County gets to open up and we host difficult conversations, and that we acknowledge that there are multiple histories and multiple stories. And we've spent a lot of time only telling perhaps two stories, but two stories that didn't allow for nuance. So I'm going to take you back down the road, and we'll go really fast. And this time I'm going to tell a different story. Because nowhere in this research does it say anything about the fact that this was a plantation. It's referred to as a 1,000-acre farm. There is reference to John Mason and his sons owning slaves, not enslaved people, not people who were enslaved, but owning slaves. There is reference to the fact that the product from that farm, that what they call very large farm, produced immense wealth. But there's no mention of the descendants of the black descendants of the Masons. The last person to be born in the house was Matthew Mason, who was black. He's the grandfather of Danita Mason Hogans, who is a researcher and professor who runs part of the Reconciliation Project with UNC. She and I have turned out to be sisters from different misters and mothers, deeply connected to the work, deeply involved in it, making sure that the stories get told with honesty and integrity so that both stories can be told and both can have nuance. And we have spent a lot of time working through what does it really mean to be the descendant of a plantation. Her father was born in that house, and the reason he could not inherit, so he was born to a white slave owner's grandchild and a formerly enslaved woman. And they were not, their children, they were allowed to live in the house for their lifetime, but their children could not inherit the land. And so they vacated. And the land was subsequently sold and eventually ended up in the hands of some colonel who then gifted it to the Army Corps of Engineers. I don't know that it would have survived the creation of Jordan Lake had it not been in the hands of white owners, and probably white owners of some prominence at the time. Most of the plantations that were in the area that this house remains were flooded, in spite of the fact that this was some of the most fertile land in Chatham County. There are many stories that can be told by the families whose land was flooded. And those are absent from this. There are many stories that can be told from the few that survived, the few parcels, the few homes that survived Jordan Lake. And whatever wonderful reasons there may be and compelling needs there may have been for a Jordan Lake to be formed, we can't dispense of and dispose of those stories and tell this history accurately. And I think it's our responsibility to continue to tell this story, to tell it over and over again, to invite more people in so that they add their portion of the story. Matthew Mason actually had wonderful memories of his childhood in that house. I don't know how they survived this, but without heat or air conditioning, the grandchildren would sleep in the attic. And that house, my house is not well insulated. There are places that I can poke my finger through and feel the exterior. I have cats because I have mice, and that seems to be the only solution. It really is deep. That drive was not an exaggeration. It's about a 15-minute drive from the main road and through 2 sets of locked gates. And people often ask, how do you live back there alone? I feel as though I've taken on the responsibility of being not just the keeper of the property of the house, the maintenance of the house, but the keeper of the stories, and that there is some protection and power in that. And I know that that can sound a little bit crazy, but I do believe that there are many people who we have come read about and come across in history and our teachings who took chances and did things that we now say, oh, that was really brave. And I believe that the reason they were able to do it and the reason they survived it, and not just survived it, but thrived in it, is because there is some protection in telling our truth in a way that doesn't harm anyone else. And it is, I do not believe, just pure chance that I ended up there. A lot of what happened in the years preceding my moving into the Mason house really began to me to form the foundation for why someone with connection to Chatham County should be in that house. I did not know it existed. And I don't know how many of you did not realize that there was this incredible gift 3.5 miles down a gravel road. You actually drive into Durham first in order to get back into Chatham. And as a county commissioner, I had heard about it on Facebook from a former county commissioner. And I was convinced. I've lived in North Chatham for 18 years. And I was like, there's no way there's a house on Jordan Lake in my district that I don't know about. It tortured me for about 24 hours. I woke up at about 1 a.m. and decided to take the purported address of the house, which is not properly an address, as it turns out, and look for the voting district. And it turned out to be mine. Sign number 1 that I belong in that house. Sign number 2 was a couple of years before that, Chatham County local government had taken responsibility, some small part of our responsibility, for the lack of action and, in fact, our active role in the lynching of Eugene Daniel, 16-year-old Eugene Daniel, and then of the multiple other people that were lynched in Chatham because government did not do what it was meant to do. The Sheriff's Department also did, and thanks to members of the CCCRC, that's a lot of C's. We got a memorial. We spoke about it publicly. We acknowledged it. It was that happened a few years after we took down the Confederate monument, and not because there was a lot of conversation about removing history. And the position that our board took, and I continue to take, is that there is an appropriate placement for a Confederate monument if you are mourning your war dead. It is not in the front of the courthouse. And it tells a better story when it's in the appropriate place. It tells a lie when it's in the wrong place. And my job as the custodian and caretaker of this incredible house that was covered in mud daubers and filthy, and clearly more snakes, rats, and cockroaches had lived there than I care to remember or think about. But the house is a chore. There is a lot of work in maintaining and keeping it up to speed. I'm still working on insulation. My heating and cooling bills show that clearly. But this house has stood the test of time. It is an incredibly beautiful condition inside. We actually make new family memories there. It is on the National Register of Historic Places, so I am limited in what I can change there. I'm limited in what I want to change about that house. I really think it is an absolute gem. There are minor things that I've done around the house. I've included some tiling work in the bathrooms where the floors were linoleum that was installed in the 70s. I did get the house repainted in the colors that the research has shown were the original colors. I've left interior walls with places where the paint has been stripped away, and you can see that years and years and years of people have painted and painted over, because I think that tells part of the story as well. And so I tell the story slightly differently than the history textbooks do. And I say that in 1850, a group that probably consisted of all men, both black and white, constructed this house. A lot of the handiwork that you see, the carving of the stair railing, is truly a marvelous piece. It was originally a single piece of carved wood that goes up and curves around. It's a 0-turn radius. I do not advise going downstairs at night in the dark after having a glass of wine, but it is absolutely beautiful. The carvings inside, the amount of molding in a house of a prominent farmer, it really defies the expectation. All of the downstairs and upstairs bedrooms have molding, heavy molding, chair rail. There are fireplaces, 4 fireplaces in the main rooms. It really was a house that extraordinary detail was paid to. The carving on all of the corner stones on the exterior and the interior of the house are the same. It is a home that I think the people whose hands built that have pride in. And being able to bring them back and show them where their ancestors are buried and the work that their ancestors put into this incredible piece of history matters so much, right? You don't have a complete story of who you are if you don't know that you did this, that you participated in this, that you actually were the ones who fed the last troops at the end of the Confederate battle as the troops marched back north to go home. UNC and that farm, that plantation, were the last place that they were fed before they left North Carolina. And knowing that your place in this story is so much more than you were an enslaved person. You were the descendant of an enslaved person. Who birthed the babies in that house? Probably Sally Mason. Why did those children love her so much? Probably because there were multiple times that her own children were displaced and she held them and she comforted them and she made a poultice for a scraped knee or a tea for a sick tummy and did the same for their mothers and fathers and their grandchildren. And so, yes, they absolutely loved her. And then there was the background story. There were times when the enslaved people in their own homes cooked something special from some little piece of pork that they had gotten handed down. We know that some of the most wonderful dishes in our culinary experience today comes from the African diaspora through enslaved people, like peach crumble, peach cobbler, shrimp and grits. So I believe, and I want to tell the story, and I take ownership of a story that includes these things, that there were kids who fell in love. There were young men flirting with young Black girls on the plantation. There were babies born. There were twins every now and then. And we never hear the nuance of the enslaved African story. And I get to tell that. I get to say that there were children who were friends. And some of them were Black and some of them were white. And they played together and they probably fished together. And there was a difference between what they could become and what they would inherit. That there were weddings, there were celebrations, there were Christmases, that there were gifts given. Some boy carved something for his mother and he was Black. Some little girl went and picked a bouquet of flowers and gave it to her daddy and she was Black. And I know this to be true. I know that we just have not told the whole story. So every time I get someone to come over to the house, I tell them that this banister that you see here, that was once a single piece of wood carved probably by the great-grandfather of Kenny Mann. There are incredible logbooks kept about enslaved people. So if we want to know what people's gifts and talents were, we can find out, right? Because slave owners were very meticulous about the skills and value of their enslaved people because they wanted the insurance money, they wanted to insure them properly, and it was all reflected in the census. The census detailed what people's skills were, what they were valued for. And as heartbreaking as that sounds, to me, it also tells a story of, yes, we absolutely made these things. Beautiful beds, so in the house, I've brought in old furniture. I am dedicating this bedroom downstairs to Sally Mason. If her spirit ever wants to come back and live in that house, this is her room. It's downstairs, it's across from the kitchen, it's in the family spaces. It's where she should have been if she were the person in the house, cooking, starting the fire, making the breakfast, taking care of the family. This is where Sally should have been. So now there's another grandma sitting on a porch, inviting her with her granddaughter, inviting her children in, celebrating Christmas together. And it is a scary drive down a really long road, but I can assure you, it is more than worth the ride. And I promise myself that they're gonna have to cart me out feet first. And that's the road I'm gonna take. Thank you all for being here. I do want to invite, I promised about 2 years ago that I was going to start having people over, and I've done a really horrible job of it. I am going to work with the Historical Society Association and organize groups to come out to the house because it is a Chatham County story. It deserves to be told. You deserve to see it. It should not have been a secret and deep in the woods. I hope that you'll not only come out, but you'll invite your kids and grandkids to come out and we can begin to tell a better story of who we are collectively. Because we aren't just little snippets of stories that get told by someone else on paper and get presented as the truth. Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to take questions. I may not tell the truth because I may not know the answer, but I will try to answer it as best I can. I am not a historian and I'm not a researcher. I am just a very happy resident of the Mason House. Yes, I'm going to start first with the gentleman in the back who I saw first and then Amanda Robertson.
Could you repeat the location of the house?
So the house is just off of Farrington Road. There isn't a street name on the sign. There's no sign. It's Transis Camp Road. The address of the house is 2700 Transis Camp Road. Your GPS will stop you about 3 miles before the house and say you're there. And it is behind locked gates, but the address is 2700 Transis Camp Road, which is a Durham road. Transis. Transis Camp. Amanda.
Yeah, first I'll attest, it is really, really far, and I was one of the people that asked Karen if she felt safe way, way, way back in the middle of nowhere, and she said, absolutely, without hesitation. My question though is you were talking about like grandfathers teaching their kids to hunt and fish. I immediately thought of Jordan Lake, that of course was not there, and you said that they had most of the acreage for farming covered up by Jordan Lake going in place. Do you know of any water bodies that might have been there then for them to go fishing?
So there were streams and there were, because they had hogs, they had some ponds, but there were streams running through and they're still marked on the aerial maps. When you pull up the GIS, you can still see streams running through. And part of the reason that this area was chosen is because it was sort of a drainage area and there was water flowing towards there from Durham. Well, Durham wasn't a county at the time, but flowing from that area where Durham, Orange County are. And I will say that, Amanda, part of why I'm not afraid is I feel as though if someone walks 3.5 miles down a dirt road to get to my house, that I should just say, come in. Like, do you need water? Can I call somebody to pick you up? So that helps. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have to lock and unlock the gates every time you come to?
Yes. And there's a spider that builds a horrible spider that builds a giant web on the gate every single day. And every day someone takes it down. And it's usually not me. And he puts it back. So, yes. Yes.
Who owns the house today?
The United States government. Technically it was the Army Corps of Engineers that signed the documentation, but if you look up the title deeds, it is the United States of America.
So you rent it?
I actually am the caretaker, so through Preservation NC.
Good.
Yeah. Yes.
Is Sally the only formerly enslaved person that's buried on that property?
That's buried in the White family. Yes. Yes. So there are markers. So enslaved people wouldn't have had gravestones. They would have had sometimes something was made out of some stones, or a circle of stones would have indicated a place where someone was buried. And Chatham County did do a cemetery project. So there is some indication of who they believe would have been buried there.
Do you know that she had children, but they're not buried anywhere near her?
No, they're not buried there. Yeah. Yes, and then I'll come to you.
Thank you so much for sharing this wonderful treasure. I'm not too far from there on 751, as you know, and I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
I'm right up the street from Blue Hope Baptist Church. But it's interesting to hear, and I'm glad that you're sharing all this information. There's so much to be known, and so much for people to want to know in regards to the past. I know personally, I can go back to the 1700s with my great-great-great-grandpa, Illy Gordon, who was on Mount Illy Church Road at that plantation. So it's a lot to be shared for sure. Thank
It
you.
is. Thank you. And you know, one thing that Kenny Mann actually pointed out to me, I was questioning the surnames. There were Masons, Manns, nuns. There were several surnames that came out of this property. And I asked him about Sally's surname and his, and he said, you know, our surnames didn't mean anything. And that's when it really and truly just hit me. That's right, it depended on who you were given soul to. So there is a real possibility that the families from the Horton plantation and the Mason and Mann plantations would have actually been genetic relatives, just with different surnames.
And when you point that out, once I did DNA testing, we were connected to the nuns and to the Masons, and they married, and I'm pretty sure those lines go back because the Masons in my family on my mom's side are directly connected to that area, right at the Chatham Durham County line, right before you cross Georgia Lake.
Yeah.
To Durham.
So I'm sure it's the same family. And interestingly enough, the descendants of the Mason descendants, the enslaved ones, almost all of the grandchildren are extremely successful. PhDs, doctors, professors, just a shocking whole host of incredibly intelligent, like great careers, historians, researchers, everything. The white Masons did not produce as well, which is how the property ended up going to like a cousin, and then he mortgaged it heavily, and it got purchased by someone completely unconnected to the family. The original John Mason only had 2 kids, and only one of his children had any children. And she predeceased her children early, and most of the property went to the granddaughter, so her daughter, who had married outside, married into a different plantation. So for quite some time, that Mason plantation was run by a young white woman whose husband was a cousin, and he suffered a traumatic brain injury while they had 6 very young children. And she managed to keep the farm going, but with the help of the Black foreman, just as emancipation started, just as slavery ended. And they continued to do that for about 12 years. And at that point, he decided he was going to move into Chapel Hill and seek his fortunes, and she lost the place. And they became paupers. That was the grandfather of of 2 of the men who came over. And they remembered distinctly the deep poverty that their family lived in until some benefactors came along and paid for them to go to UNC. So very different outcomes, like shockingly different outcomes. And for me, it just sort of lifted up. If you were a white woman, you were as vulnerable a demographic as anyone, right? And so the fact that she just lost everything because her husband was injured was, to me, an indication that we need to be thinking about how all of these intersections have undermined and affected outcomes for women, people of color, immigrants, there's a whole section of society that just doesn't have and had not historically had access to the same resources. And I'm not talking about money. Yes.
I wonder if you know anything about the way the house is built, the structure, and if the roof is original structure, or if it's been replaced?
So the roofing, the shingles have been replaced, but it is the original roof. I know very little about any construction kind of thing. It is what they call a 4/4. So there are 4 rooms and then there are 4 rooms above. And each of the main rooms has, so the living room and the dining room and upstairs bedrooms all have the fireplaces. They were capped because all of the interiors are wood. So that's probably wise. And the entire structure is wooden and it sits on brick cornerstones those have been updated. They were crumbling. The original floorboards, original wall paneling. So the downstairs, that center portion that was built, there was an addition in 1920, but that center portion of the house that was original to the house, to the structure, has incredibly wide boards on the walls, and we don't find that anymore.
You know how
A
wide they
lot
are?
of that, I don't know the widest one. There is one that is at least 14 inches, which is huge. And like I said, original flooring throughout the entire downstairs. The kitchen was an addition, and the kitchen is a weird room. The cabinets are too high. Nobody in that time would have been able to reach anything. There's some quirky things, but the bedrooms have walk-in closets. And I can't even fathom that having been done in 1920, but it was. I suspect that children slept in the closets and adults slept in the bedroom. There's a downstairs closet so I had a young woman who studies and does histories of slave houses come out to the property. She has identified a few places on the property. So it's a 16-acre perimeter around the house. That's no hunting. The rest of the land is a hunting area. But she's identified several foundations of what probably were slave houses, and our hope is that we can restore some of those and let people see where they would have been in proximity to the house, what it would have looked like. But one thing she pointed out to me, so there's a downstairs, like a Harry Potter closet, I call it. It's short, it's like in the slope of the eaves, super cool little closet, and people would not have built a closet in those days. And it turns out that would have been where women and small children went to the bathroom at night. So they would have kept a little cash pot or something in there so that they wouldn't have to go outside at night. And I use it as a coat closet. Yes.
So are you working with this professor or the Historical Society to collect the census records and all the documentation so that can be made available at some point?
So Danita Mason Hogans has done a lot of that work. She had started doing it before I came to the house, but she was under the impression that the house was gone. So we've kind of combined our information and efforts, and our ultimate goal would be to have some sort of a learning center at the house where people can come and examine the records. I have so many dreams about what this could potentially be. I would love if people could come and see what it would have looked like when it was a plantation, even though Jordan Lake is on both sides of me. I'm on a peninsula in the lake. But just to give people a sense of the vastness of a plantation that's 1,000 acres. And so we are combining that work. She works full time. My life is crazy. So it isn't happening at any rapid clip, but we're now at a place where a lot of it has been collated. And there's a group of graduate students at UNC helping to kind of synthesize it all and also think about, so right now it's owned by the US government and anything could happen. We would really like it to be in Chatham County ownership. So maybe some sort of a nonprofit or a foundation could own the property, and it could be, I think it should belong to Chatham County. I don't think it should be in private hands, and I certainly don't think that the US government writ large cares enough. In general, I'm not even shining a light on present circumstances. I'm just saying in general, I think local care, local support, local investment in would be better. Yes.
What is the name of the woman you've been working with at UNC?
Her name is Danita Mason Hogans. I'm gonna go here first and then I'll come. Yes.
The slide towards the beginning with the little wooden buildings, were those related to the foundation?
No, those are off the internet. They are what slave houses would have looked like. So they were very similar to what like a small tobacco, a barn, sort of out, house type barn would have looked like. But they had a compact floor and they were on a foundation of sorts. So, yeah. Yes.
I'm just curious, we all know that there's so little that actually is in writing. So the stories that you're getting from people who have been members of that family, just wondering what the most interesting story you've heard might be.
Certainly hearing from Kenny Mann that his and Danita that their uncle and grandfather remembered spending, summer nights sleeping up in the attic, was remarkable to me. And so on the 100th, so Matthew Mason was born in 1921, and so 100 years later, in December of 1921, on the anniversary of his birth, I had a dinner party at the house just to have the family over and talk about, what were their memories? Because some of the younger people have some vague memories and they remember. So Kenny Mann's, my favorite story is about Kenny Mann, and he might kill me for telling it. So he was determined to come out and find out where the house was. And for some reason, and he's not like an outdoorsy guy, he decided he was going to trek out to the cemetery by himself. And he got about a quarter of the way there, he thinks, and he saw a snake. Well, and then he got disoriented and he didn't know which way to go back. And he's walking through the woods, and he's not a little guy. I mean, if you know Kenny Mann, he's not a little guy. And he sees this little old white woman walking. For some reason, little old white women are the bravest. Diana Hills are the bravest creature on the planet. I found two walking. They were all the way down my road, like at my house. And the sun had set and they got caught too far out. I'm like, what? No, it's not that the sun set. It's like, you're just too far out. Like the gate is 3 miles back. And then I had to put them in my car. And I'm like, maybe they're not really old women. Maybe this is a ploy. And drive them back to the gate so their husbands could come get them. So Kenny's out there in the woods. He sees this little old woman and he runs to her screaming because he saw a snake. And I can only imagine what she thought. Like, what? I mean, I'm out here in the woods. Like, if I don't help this guy, right? Who knows what's gonna happen? So he followed her, and she had to get him back to his car. And he was like, and that was it. He never tried. That was about 4 years ago, a couple of years before. And he's like, if I knew her name, I would apologize. But to me, that's my favorite one. And he admits, like, what made him go out in the woods? And he's like, I'm scared of lizards. Like, what was I doing there? The one that I love the most is also the Kenny Mann story of him coming and putting his hand on that banister and tears coming. And so, step back, I grew up in the Bahamas. And my grandparents were from the Bahamas. And I knew exactly where they had grown up. I knew where my great-grandparents were from. And I had never contemplated the possibility of not being able to go to where great-grandma lived or where great-great-uncles were from. And when he said that landed on me with such like ferocity, to not have ever been anywhere or touched anything that some ancestor of yours had touched. And how important that is. If that meant that much to Kenny Mann, like how much more would it mean to some kid in, an urban, depressing environment to have some sense of themselves as more than their outcome, right? Of this sort of destiny that's been handed to them, right? And And Kenny he's successful. He's done something. He's arrived. Imagine if that child who just can't see the possibility of anything beyond what they already are, to be able to see that house and to know that they built this, that whatever was in the people that did this, whatever was in the people that survived it, whatever was in these people that could still laugh and dance and celebrate and play music and sing is still in them. And for me, that is the work that I am commanded to do because of the gift of being in this house, right? It is a gift to be in this house. There is some reason I landed there, and I am not taking it lightly or taking it for granted. I am going to make sure that any kid who is at all interested or willing to take that ride down the road can come and see. So I have brought groups of kids from, Durham, Chapel Hill. We have a couple coming from Chatham County early August to come and see who you really are, that there is a fuller story about your ancestors than formerly enslaved. Yes.
Since the government owns it and you're a caretaker, have you got any funding for restoration?
No, and that is why I think this needs to be a Chatham County or in local hands. And with not faulting the historical preservation NC, because they have so many properties. They don't have any particular interest in any one. And their theory about being a caretaker is flawed in my view, because it doesn't take into account anything about the house. It is simply make sure it doesn't fall apart because of anything you didn't do. And you can do that any way you want to. So I'm telling them that the house is not, the insulation had completely fallen away. And it can't survive like that, right? It can't survive with no barrier. There's that incredible wood it gets damp underneath. The dryer was installed and not vented. Like just incredible things. And they would say to me, well, oh, you can fix you. And I was like, well, I can hire. No, like, no, we don't provide money for that. You can do it because you're the caretaker. And I was like, you clearly don't know me. You didn't do your research. You don't want me to do that. But they basically, when I got there, things were duct taped. So not a deep love of the house, a care as in we don't want it to fall down, and don't do anything that's not historically accurate to the historical aspects. But beyond that, it's not, there's no. And I feel as though if it were a Chatham County property and it didn't have all the restrictions of, if it were a foundation that owned it, or a nonprofit didn't have all these restrictions, I'm sure the community could come together. And it's supposedly handicapped accessible, except you have to go across a rutted gravel driveway to get to the ramp. So I did have the ramp repaired, but you still can't get there. And so basic things like that, the doors don't close properly. I hate to say this, but my locked door isn't really locked. So there's a lot that I think the community would care about that and pay attention to and invest in. Protective measures. The house doesn't have gutters. And because of all the years of silt coming towards the foundation, I have this massive project that I have to do, which is moving the soil back away from the house. And as far as Preservation NC is concerned, oh, you can do that. And I assume they mean me and a shovel. But so those kinds of things have to get done. And I do think that as the custodian, I have some responsibility to invest in the house, right? If I were living in North Chatham in a beautiful house of this caliber, I would be paying more than this nominal fee that I pay to just be there. And so I think it is appropriate for me to be investing something, but most of the things that are required for this house are more costly than that. So working on that. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I hope you all remember who I said was 1, 2, 3, 4.
Commissioner Howard, thank you very much for telling this really cool story on this hidden treasure. I appreciate it. I got 2 questions. I think they're quick though. First one, any like refurbishment or renovation you've done around the house, whether inside or outside, have you stumbled upon any like noteworthy artifacts or anything that you can talk about? And secondly, because the house is so old, a lot of history, good and bad, and you living in it, do you get any sensations or vibes?
I'll answer that one first. Yes, the house has a really good energy and spirit to it. There's nothing, so like my mom and my brother came to visit. They were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you live back here." And within 24 hours of being here, my mom was like, "Oh no, you can just leave me here. I'm going to sit on the porch today." My brother at first was like, "Oh, you can't leave. We can't be here at night." 6'3", 200 pounds. We can't be here at night. And after, the first day, he was wandering around the yard looking for the projects he could do, staying. It is a very inviting house. I don't think the only people that are scared are my twins, and they're 21, but they're scared of bugs, and I do have bugs. For artifacts, I haven't found anything like historically significant, but in the attic there was an old tobacco basket. There were some like framed prints. I've put them up in the house. Pulled out the tobacco basket, and there were some old bottles. So that old glass, that old like greenish glass, and I've kept all of that kind of stuff, but nothing. And I will say I have not examined every corner of the attic because it is not a place that one wants to spend any significant amount of time in. So if you know someone really, really short and brave, they're welcome. Okay, I don't remember who was 2 and 3.
You have talked about the silt and being on a peninsula into Jordan Lake, and also how this could have very easily been included in what was made Jordan Lake. So does that mean that you are subject to flooding? Like 2 weeks ago, do you have any issues when there's flooding?
Shockingly not. And I suspect that that was by design. I don't think this house was accidentally left. I don't think they said, "Oh, we'll just leave that one." I had no flooding. And the ride to the house, as you can see, is that gravel road. There are ditches on all sides. And the rain did sort of sheet across my yard, but it was completely gone, within an hour. And it did not pool anywhere except in the massive craters along the gravel lane. But no, surprisingly, and technically, the house is in the floodplain, but if you look at an elevation map, it is up. Kathy.
Have you thought about having a documentary?
Having a what?
Film, a documentary.
Yes, I have thought about that. In fact, I had Mike Wiley come out and do an interview, and we both believe that he is the perfect person to do something. And he and Danita are also good friends, so that is an active discussion. Yeah. And then there was,
I can't help myself. When you agreed to become the custodian, had somebody who looked at it to make sure the water out of the well was healthy? I assume it's on the well. And also, having dealt with one of these houses for a few years in North Carolina, I hope somebody replaced the electricity. What's it called? Yes, copper tubing.
So very luckily, Duke has done work did the restoration of the electric several years ago, and then they did come in and they've actually buried the lines too. So I don't have wires coming to the house. There is a Duke easement on the road leading to the house on the gravel lane, and the electricity it's been really well done. I have Wi-Fi. I'm just saying. I know. Better than I had when I was in Governor's Village. And I've had the well tested, and the well water is good. I have a septic field. I have to, maintain the septic and that sort of thing. But someone did live in the house before me. And there have been gaps of years between people living in that. So it goes downhill and then someone does a little bit. And the person that lived there about 10 years ago really did a lot of work. And he personally was like very skilled, did a lot. So I didn't come in to an 1850 house and nothing had been done. It had just been abandoned for some time. And there have been little projects that I've had to do, like, mice and chewed wires. I've had, HVAC replaced this year, things like that. But again, it's in remarkably good condition. It's a beautiful home. I think if you came in today, you wouldn't suspect that it has, even the little challenges it does, but that it was where it was, 3 years ago. Yes.
Do you have any mechanism to accept volunteer resources for hours?
So that I've been working on that. I can do volunteer hours and people can contribute in kind, like by doing stuff or planting or whatever. Not for contributions that are to the contributions. There's no entity that can accept the contributions. So unless someone were, like I've had friends, community members give to me, and I did restoration to the house. But even that can be complicated for an elected official, right? So not ideal. And then the other part of that is what is the constraint to make the person do what they said they were going to do? Did that go off? Is it back? Okay. If there's no mechanism for accepting the money, then there's also no mechanism for ensuring that the money gets spent on what it is that it was gifted for. So that's something we have to work out. And again, it's why I think a foundation or a nonprofit would be an ideal partner to get this house where it has to be. Because you also don't want to be dependent on who happens to live in the house at the time, right? There really should be a set of expectations, some responsibility, a more intentional connection to the Chatham County Historical Association. So it's a work in progress, a very, very slow progress, but in progress. Is that it? Oh, sorry. Huh. Who sort of maintains the road? But it's complicated. So the first portion of the road is in Durham, and DOT manages that. They actually do a fairly good job. They replace the gravel about once a year. The second portion of the land is managed collaboratively by Wildlife Resources and the Army Corps of Engineers, and they're not as coordinated. They're great guys. They tree comes down, they'll come out and cut it. But in terms of bringing the gravel, and because their stretch is a much longer stretch, and I know it's not cheap, and that is also the portion of the road. So between the two gates, right now the first gate is also locked, so you can only get about a half mile down the road. But most of the year, the second gate is locked, so you can get about 2.5 miles down the road. And that center portion is mostly their responsibility, and it gets really a lot of traffic because hunters, trucks, all their work equipment. There's some folks that come in from, I can't remember what state, somewhere in the Midwest, that work on the horse trail annually, and they bring equipment. So that part of the road gets really dug up a lot, and they are not as responsive in repairing that. So don't come in a little car. The final portion of the road is my responsibility, and because it's just me pretty much driving on it, I've only had to make like minor repairs to the gravel, which thank goodness, because I don't know how I would get any more than that back there. Oh, sorry.
What's the process for transferring the ownership, and what are the players?
There is no real process. So that's where the complication comes in and where the lawyers come in. There are a lot of moving parts. The Army Corps, several years ago, the Army Corps of Engineers had tried to, the house was in really bad condition. There was about $400,000 of work that needed to be done to the house. It was only valued at 200 and something, and they didn't want to have to do it. And they tried to find a buyer, but it is on Army Corps of Engineers land, and it is in a hunting zone, a perimeter, and they do have to keep the gates locked. So it's not, I don't think the average person would say, I want to buy that. And then there were some concessions made, and they were able to get a lot of that restoration work done for much less. And they sort of backed off of getting rid of it. An idea had been floated about 10 years ago of having that be the residence for the ranger. And they had someone staying there a short while, but it was a disaster. And so they bagged that notion. And they've just gone back and forth on how do they want to use the property? Because our ask is for this foundation or a group to purchase it and keep it in permanent conservation of the 16 acres and lease the road, the access to the road. And so we would share the responsibility for maintaining the gravel lane and the gates. But that's not simple when you're dealing with like the United States government, right? Because what are they granting us if they want to change that, or if they need it for some other purpose, if it becomes a liability. There's so much. So there's no super neat, clear way to go about doing this. There is a possible new way that I can't go into too much details about, but there is an owner of a property adjacent that is very interested in putting his land in preservation, in permanent conservation. And if he does that, there is the potential to create a new access point. And that may be the best bet, because that 3.5 mile gravel lane is the most complicated part of this. It's the access point for hunters. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you all again for coming out.
On the back table, we have a few books and pamphlets. If you wish to take them, it's all free. And also there's a basket of yellow ribbons. Yellow has long been the color of hope, especially hope for the return of someone or something precious. And this is a yellow ribbon to return our democracy. So if you wish to take one, please do. And thank you for coming.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you so much. I heard what you had to say. People want to